I didn't wake up to my son crying beside my hospital bed. I woke up to a nurse holding my phone, smiling gently, like she was about to show me something comforting. "You should see this," she said. "Your son posted an update. I had been unconscious for 3 days. Tubes in my throat, blood in my lungs. Doctors arguing quietly outside my room about whether I'd make it through the night. My hands were shaking when I took the phone. There he was, my son, standing on a rooftop, champagne glass raised, city lights behind him like a victory banner. His arm was wrapped around a woman I barely knew. The caption was short, almost careless. Finally free. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't ask when he posted it. I didn't ask why. Because in that moment, staring at the ceiling while a machine breathed for me, I understood something with terrifying clarity. He wasn't waiting to see if I survived. He was waiting to see what he'd inherit. And 7 days later, when $4 million vanished, he finally learned what my silence had been preparing. The ICU room smelled like disinfectant and quiet fear. Machines beeped in steady rhythms, keeping track of a body that had almost failed its owner. My ribs felt like cracked glass every time I breathed, but the pain was distant secondary to something heavier pressing on my chest. The first thing I looked for wasn't a doctor. It wasn't a nurse. It was my son. My eyes drifted to the visitor log clipped neatly to the wall. A simple piece of paper, meant to be forgettable. Dates, times, names written in tired handwriting. I scanned it slowly. Linda, Marcus, Rachel, my assistant, my operations manager, my lead engineer. Some names appeared again and again, spread across different days, different hours. People who had shown up before work, people who had stayed late, people who had nothing to gain by being there. I reached the bottom of the page. Evan's name wasn't there. Not once. I had been unconscious for nearly 72 hours. Long enough for emergency calls to be made, long enough for panic to settle, long enough for a son to walk through that door if he cared. I closed my eyes, listening to the steady beep beside me. This wasn't bad timing. This wasn't stress. This was a decision. And for the first time since becoming a father, I allowed myself to accept a truth I'd been avoiding for years. I was alone. I didn't ask for my phone right away. When you wake up in the ICU, you learn quickly that timing matters. Pain comes in waves. Truth does too. I waited until the room was quiet, until the nurse finished adjusting the IV and the door clicked shut behind her. Then I reached for the phone on the side table. 16 missed calls, dozens of notifications, and one message preview that made my stomach tighten. Evan posted a new photo. I unlocked the screen. There he was, my son, standing somewhere high above the city, the kind of place you rent by the hour when you want people to believe you've made it. He looked relaxed, confident, untouched by the idea that his father was lying in a hospital bed with broken ribs and internal bleeding. Champagne glasses clinked in the background. Someone had tagged a luxury hotel. Another tag showed a jewelry store I recognized immediately. I'd paid for that ring. I scrolled down. The caption sat there, plain and unforgiving. Finally free. No explanation, no context, no hesitation. I felt something detach inside me, not sharply, not dramatically, but cleanly, the way a rope snaps when it's been fraying for years. I locked the phone and set it face down. The heart monitor beside me picked up speed. A nurse glanced through the glass, ready to intervene. I raised my hand slightly, letting her know I was fine. What she couldn't see was that something far more important than my body had just stabilized. I wasn't confused anymore. I was awake. People think silence in a hospital room is peaceful. It isn't. Silence gives your thoughts too much space. By the end of that first day awake, I started noticing patterns. Not dramatic ones, small, undeniable details that added up faster than I expected. Linda arrived just after sunrise, like she always had for the last 16 years. She didn't know if I could talk yet, so she spoke anyway. About emails, about clients worried about me, about how she'd postponed a meeting because, in her words, "You'd want to be here for this." Marcus came during his lunch break. He sat in the corner with his laptop, answering questions no one had officially asked him to handle yet. When I caught his eye, he smiled like he was relieved I was still me. Rachel stayed the longest. She pulled a chair close to my bed and talked about work like nothing had changed. Not because she was insensitive, but because she believed I'd listen. They rotated without coordination. No schedule, no obligation. just presence. At one point, a nurse leaned in and whispered, "Your people have been here all day." My people. That phrase stayed with me, because there was one person who wasn't part of that group. My emergency contact had been called 17 times while I was unconscious. I saw the record later. 17 attempts, 0 answers. I didn't feel anger yet. Not exactly. What I felt was something colder and more precise. Understanding. And once you understand someone's priorities, you can stop pretending they're different. That night, staring at the ceiling while the city hummed outside my window, I realized I wasn't waiting for my son anymore. I was watching who stayed. Lying still gives memory permission to speak. It doesn't rush. It doesn't soften things. It just replays what you were too busy to notice. I remembered when Evan used to call me every Sunday night. Not for money, not for advice, just to talk. He'd tell me about classes, roommates, ideas he was convinced would change the world. That stopped somewhere along the way. After the MBA acceptance letter, our conversations shortened. After the condo purchase, they became transactional. After I wired money for the engagement ring, they became efficient. How fast can it clear? Can we raise the limit? It's just temporary. Temporary became routine. Routine became expectation. Expectation became entitlement. I told myself I was being a good father. That sacrifice was part of the job. That someday he'd understand what it took to build something from nothing. But lying in that bed, staring at the faint reflection of machines in the glass, I finally admitted the truth. I had confused provision with connection. I paid for his success, but I hadn't required his character. Every warning sign had been there: missed calls, postponed visits, irritation when I talked about work instead of wire transfers. I'd ignored them because ignoring them was easier than accepting what they meant. The ICU didn't allow denial. There was no room for it. When your body almost gives up, excuses don't survive. By the time the night nurse dimmed the lights, I wasn't grieving the accident anymore. I was grieving the version of my son I thought still existed. And grief, when it finishes, often leaves something sharper behind. On the 4th day, I learned how close indifference sounds to politeness. Dr. Miller tried calling Evan that morning. I didn't hear it live, but everything in the ICU gets documented. Every call, every response, every word that matters later. He answered on the 3rd ring. She explained my condition carefully: internal injuries, complications, uncertainty. The kind of explanation doctors give when they don't want to scare people, but also don't want to lie. There was a pause. Then Evan sighed. "According to the notes," he said, "I'm in the middle of something important. Can you just email me the summary?" Important. The doctor mentioned that family presence often helped recovery, that hearing a familiar voice, feeling someone close by, could make a difference. Evan laughed softly. Not cruelly, not loudly, just enough to sound inconvenienced. "She'll be fine," he said. "He's always been tough." I was listed as he in my own medical chart. When I read the report later, I didn't feel rage. Rage requires surprise. This didn't. What I felt was clarity settling into place, like pieces of a puzzle clicking together all at once. I wasn't part of his priorities. I was a background condition, something to manage, something expected to resolve itself without interrupting his plans. That afternoon, I stared at the ceiling while the IV clicked rhythmically beside me and understood something crucial. Love doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes quietly, patiently, until one day there's nothing left but habit and expectation. And habits break much easier than bonds. That was the moment I stopped hoping and started paying attention. On the 5th day, my phone finally rang. Evan's name lit up the screen like nothing had happened. No missed you text. No apology. No hesitation. Just a call late afternoon right between a nurse change and dinner trays. "Dad," he said brightly, as if we were picking up a conversation from yesterday. "Wow, you're awake. That's good timing. Good timing." I didn't answer right away. My throat was still raw from the breathing tube, but that wasn't the reason. I wanted to hear what came next. "So listen," he continued, rushing ahead before silence could slow him down. "The wedding's in a few days, and there are some final payments that need to go out. Nothing major, just logistics." Logistics. He listed numbers like grocery items, catering, flowers, photographer. Each one casually placed on the table, already assumed to be handled. He never asked how much pain I was in. He never asked what the doctors said. He never asked if I needed anything. At one point he laughed and said, "Honestly, This whole hospital thing has been kind of disruptive. Cash flow's a little tight right now. I stared at the wall across from my bed, where the paint had cracked in a thin, almost invisible line. That crack felt familiar. Then he said it, the question he'd been circling since the call began. Hypothetically, he added, lowering his voice, if things had gone the other way, how fast would the accounts have been accessible? That was when the room went completely quiet. Not because the machines stopped, but because something inside me did. I didn't react the way he expected. There was no sharp inhale, no raised voice, no argument. Just silence. "Dad?" Evan said. "You still there?" I was there, more present than I'd been in years. "You're asking about access to my money," I said slowly, each word measured, "while I'm still in a hospital bed." He hesitated, just long enough to pretend he hadn't meant it that way. "No, no, of course not," he replied quickly. "I'm just trying to plan responsibly. The wedding planner needs answers today, and Stephanie's parents are particular. Particular. I imagine them polished, composed, used to control. People who'd never built anything with their hands but expected everything to work on schedule." Evan kept talking, filling the space with justifications. He mentioned stress. He mentioned optics. He mentioned embarrassment. He never mentioned me. At one point, he said, "I mean, you're not going anywhere, right? But it's smart to understand timelines." Timelines. I watched a nurse walk past my door, pushing a cart of medications, moving carefully around people who were fighting to stay alive. "Evan," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest, "do you know who's been here every day?" He paused. "I assume the staff's taking good care of you." That was his answer. Not names. Not gratitude. Not curiosity. Just assumption. When the call ended, I didn't feel angry. I felt finished. Finished explaining. Finished excusing. Finished pretending this was still a relationship built on anything other than convenience. And for the first time since waking up, I smiled, because I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I didn't move quickly. That was the first mistake Evan made, assuming silence meant weakness. After the call, I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the small cracks like they were markers on a road I'd already traveled. Nurses came and went. Medications were adjusted. My body healed in measurable ways. My mind was already far ahead. On the 6th day, I asked for my laptop. Linda brought it without questions. She set it up carefully, plugged it in, and placed my reading glasses beside it like she always did. Before leaving, she hesitated. "Do you need anything else?" she asked. I looked at her and said, "I need access." She nodded once. No confusion, no fear. That afternoon I logged into accounts I hadn't touched personally in years. Not because I couldn't, but because I trusted people. Trusted systems. Trusted family. Trust, I was learning, ages poorly when it's one-sided. I reviewed ownership structures, beneficiaries, authorization levels, everything that had been set up under the assumption that loyalty came packaged with blood. One by one, those assumptions dissolved. I didn't change anything yet. That part mattered. Because the most effective decisions aren't made in anger. They're made when the noise dies down, and the picture becomes clear. That evening, Evan posted again. A story this time. Wedding countdown. Smiling faces. No hospital. No hesitation. I watched it once. Then I closed the app. 7 days. That was all I needed. By the time he realized something was wrong, it wouldn't be emotional. It would be structural. And structures, once changed, don't apologize. The 7th morning arrived quietly. No drama, no alarms. Just sunlight slipping through the narrow ICU window like it had somewhere better to be. I was sitting up by then, eating real food, pretending my appetite hadn't disappeared along with my patience. At 8:47 a.m., Linda stepped into the room with her tablet pressed to her chest. "Everything's ready," she said softly. I nodded. At exactly 9 a.m., the changes went live. No speeches, no confrontation, no warnings. Authorizations were removed. Spending limits collapsed. Access that had been handed out casually over years vanished in seconds. I watched the confirmation screens appear one after another, calm and impersonal. Completed. 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 At 9:03, my phone rang. "Evan." I let it ring twice before answering. "Dad," he said, breathless. "There's a problem." I didn't respond right away. I wanted him to say it. "All the cards are declining," he continued. panic creeping in. The florist, the caterer, even the hotel. They're saying there's an issue with authorization. I took a slow sip of coffee. That's strange, I said. Have you tried calling the bank? I've been on hold, he snapped. They won't talk to me. They keep saying there's some kind of account restructuring. Restructuring. The word landed exactly the way it was supposed to. Dad, he lowered his voice, suddenly careful. The wedding's in a few hours. I need you to fix this. Now. I stared out the window, watching cars move freely on the street below. Evan, I said quietly, this isn't broken. Silence. What do you mean? I continued, it's working exactly as intended. That was the moment his breathing changed. And that's how I knew the lesson had finally begun. What do you mean it's working? Evan demanded, his voice tight now, stripped of confidence. I leaned back against the pillow, feeling the dull ache in my ribs remind me I was still healing, just not in the way he thought. I said evenly, the accounts are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. You can't do this, he snapped. This is my wedding day. I almost smiled. No, I replied. This is the day you finally pay for it yourself. His breathing turned shallow. I could hear movement on his end, doors opening, someone asking questions in the background, panic spreading through a room that had been built on assumptions. You told me you'd handle it, he said. You said the payments would go through. They did, I answered. Just not for you. Silence stretched between us, thick and unfamiliar. Then his tone changed, softer, calculated. Dad, come on. Let's not do this today. People are flying in. Stephanie's parents are already here. This is humiliating. Humiliating. I thought of the ICU, of the visitor log, of 17 unanswered calls. Humiliating, I repeated. Is being asked how fast your money can be accessed if you die? That's not what I meant, he said quickly. It's exactly what you meant, I replied. You just didn't expect me to hear it. He exhaled sharply, frustration leaking through the cracks. So what now? He asked. You're just going to let everything fall apart? I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of weakness, but finality. No, Evan, I said. I'm letting you see what happens when support disappears. And for the first time in his life, he had no one left to call. The calls didn't stop after that. They multiplied. Evan called again. And again. Then text messages started stacking up, short at first, then longer, more desperate. Dad, please call me. This is getting out of control. Stephanie's parents are asking questions. I didn't respond. From my hospital bed, I could hear life moving forward without me, carts rolling, nurses laughing softly at the desk, someone down the hall watching a morning show too loudly. At 10:15 a.m., an unfamiliar number appeared. I answered this one. Mr. Harris? A woman asked. Her voice was tight, professional. This is the event coordinator for the venue. We're experiencing payment issues related to your son's wedding. I let her finish. She explained policies, deadlines, certified funds, consequences. I understand, I said calmly. Unfortunately, I won't be authorizing anything today. There was a pause on the line. I see, she said finally. Then I need to inform you that unless payment clears within the hour, services will be suspended. Do what you need to do, I replied. When the call ended, I stared at my hands. They were steady. That surprised me. For years I'd been afraid that if I ever stopped holding everything together, it would all collapse. Now I realized something different. What collapses wasn't built on strength. It was built on me. By noon, the situation had unraveled completely. I didn't need updates. They came to me anyway. Linda stepped into the room with her tablet, hesitation written all over her face. I wasn't sure if you wanted to know, she said carefully. I do, I replied. She told me the caterer had packed up. The florist refused to release the arrangements. The photographer left after waiting 40 minutes past the deadline. 200 guests were already gathering in a hotel lobby, dressed for a celebration that no longer existed. Evan called again while she was still standing there. I let it go to voicemail. When the message ended, Linda looked at me differently, not with pity, not with fear, but with understanding. He's angry, she said quietly. I know, I replied. Anger was predictable. It was what came after entitlement lost its footing. What I hadn't expected was how calm I felt. No rush of victory. No satisfaction. Just certainty. For years, I'd believed I was protecting my son by smoothing every obstacle, absorbing every consequence on his behalf. But protection without limits doesn't create strength. It creates dependency. And dependency, when challenged, turns vicious. That afternoon, as the hospital shifted into a slower rhythm, I realized something else. This wasn't punishment. It was education. And like all real lessons, it was arriving late and all at once. At 4:12 p.m., Evan finally showed up. Not at the wedding venue. At the hospital, the door to my room opened harder than necessary, the sound sharp enough to make a nurse glance up from the station outside. Evan stood there in a suit that cost more than my first car, tie loosened, jaw tight with rage he hadn't figured out how to hide yet. "What did you do?" he demanded. I didn't look up right away. I was reading an email Linda had printed for me, something routine, something ordinary. I wanted him to feel how little urgency he carried now. "You need to fix this," he continued, stepping closer. "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed both families." I finally met his eyes. "You embarrassed yourself," I said calmly. His face flushed. "Do you have any idea what today was supposed to be?" "Yes," I replied. "And do you know what this week was for me?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You didn't come," I continued. "You didn't call. You asked about my money before you asked about my life." "That's not fair," he snapped. "You're twisting things." "No," I said quietly. "I'm finally seeing them clearly." For the first time, Evan looked unsure, not angry, not confident, just exposed. And exposure, I'd learned, terrifies people who've lived their lives protected from consequences. Security arrived quietly. They didn't rush. They didn't grab him. They simply stood at the door, waiting. Evan noticed them and scoffed. "You're really doing this?" he said, turning back to me. "You're choosing employees over your own son?" I shifted slightly, the movement pulling at my ribs, reminding me how close I'd come to never answering him again. "I'm choosing loyalty," I said. "You stopped offering that a long time ago." He laughed, sharp and hollow. "This isn't over. I'll contest everything. I'll tell people you weren't thinking clearly. You were medicated, confused." There it was. Not grief, not regret, a threat. I watched his words hang in the air, then fall flat under their own weight. "You can try," I said, "but lies don't age well." One of the guards stepped forward. "Sir, you need to lower your voice, or leave." Evan looked around the room at the machines, at my IV, at the thin line between recovery and ruin he'd ignored all week. For the first time, he seemed to realize where he was. He straightened his jacket, pride snapping back into place like armor. "Fine," he muttered. "Enjoy this. You'll regret it." As he walked out, his footsteps echoed down the hallway, loud and angry. When the door closed, the room felt lighter. Not happier, just honest. And honesty, I was learning, was far more valuable than blood. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because of pain, because of paperwork. Linda brought a slim folder just after evening rounds, careful not to make it feel dramatic. Inside were documents I'd approved earlier that afternoon quietly, legally, without witnesses or speeches. Revisins, authorizations, final confirmations. I read every page slowly. For years, my estate plan had been simple, automatic, built on an assumption that no longer existed. Now it reflected reality. Who showed up? Who stayed? Who proved, without being asked, that they cared even when there was nothing to gain? I signed the last page with a steady hand. No shaking, no hesitation. When the pen lifted, something inside me settled. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is emotional, messy, loud. This was alignment. Later, Rachel stopped by before heading home. She didn't mention Evan. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "We've got things covered. Focus on getting better." I nodded, grateful in a way words don't reach. After she left, I stared out the window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, my son was explaining himself, blaming circumstances, telling a story where he was still the victim. He didn't know yet, but by morning the story he'd been telling himself for years would officially be over. And nothing, no apology, no threat would change that. The fallout didn't wait for morning. At 7:18 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from Linda. "He's trying to get access." That was all she needed to say. I knew exactly what it meant. Evan had moved from anger to strategy, the phase where people stop yelling and start looking for shortcuts. Lawyers, old contacts, anyone who might still believe he had authority simply because of his last name. By 8 a.m., I had confirmation. He'd called the bank. He'd emailed our legal counsel. He'd even tried reaching a board member I'd quietly removed months earlier. Every attempt hit the same wall. No authorization, no standing, no leverage. When he called me again, his voice sounded different. Not furious. Afraid. "You can't just erase me," he said. "People will ask questions." "They already have," I replied calmly. There was a long pause. Then his voice dropped. "So that's it?" he asked. "After everything?" I thought about the ICU, the visitor log, the unanswered calls. "Yes," I said. "After everything you didn't do?" He hung up without another word. I set the phone down and looked around the room at the quiet competence, the steady care, the people who'd never once asked what they'd get in return. For the first time, I felt something close to peace. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped losing. News has a way of traveling faster than truth. By the afternoon, I could feel it moving quiet conversations, careful tones, people choosing their words before speaking to me. No one asked directly, but everyone wanted to know the same thing. Was it really over? Linda didn't bring gossip. She brought facts. "Evan's been calling people," she said. "Old contacts, distant relatives, anyone who might still listen." "About me?" I asked. She nodded. "About you being manipulated. About not being yourself lately." I almost laughed. When people lose control, they don't invent new strategies. They recycle old ones. Confusion, doubt, sympathy. The problem was, Evan had chosen the wrong timing. Doctors had cleared me mentally, documented, signed, witnessed. Legal changes had been executed cleanly, quietly, correctly. There was nothing emotional left to challenge. That evening, I received an email from an attorney I barely remembered hiring years ago. Short, polite, direct. "We no longer represent your son." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because when the professionals walk away, it's rarely personal. It's procedural. And procedure doesn't care how badly someone wants a different outcome. As the sun dipped below the skyline outside my window, I realized something important. Evan wasn't fighting for reconciliation. He was fighting for restoration. And those are very different things. One is earned. The other is gone forever. The confrontation didn't come with shouting this time. It came quietly through a message forwarded to me just before discharge. Linda stood near the window while I read it, arms crossed, already knowing what it said. Evan had sent an email to several people inside the company. Not asking. Warning. He claimed I was being influenced, that I wasn't in my right mind, that certain individuals were taking advantage of my condition and positioning themselves to benefit. He promised consequences, job losses, legal action, public exposure. I read it twice. Then I handed the phone back to Linda. "He's desperate," she said. "Yes," I replied. And desperate people reveal themselves. Within an hour, responses came in not from me, but from others. Rachel declined firmly. Marcus documented everything. Legal counsel flagged the message as inappropriate. No one defended him. That was the part Evan never understood. Authority without respect is temporary. When people stand beside you voluntarily, they don't abandon you when pressure arrives. By the time the nurse returned with discharge papers, the matter was already settled. Not by confrontation, by consensus. As I signed the last form and prepared to leave the hospital, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because the conflict was over, but because the truth was no longer mine alone to carry. It was visible, and visibility changes everything. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning. Not dramatic, not secretive, just a standard conference room, glass walls, neutral lighting, exactly the kind of place where decisions are supposed to feel ordinary. Every department head was there. Legal counsel, finance, operations. Evan arrived last. He walked in with confidence he hadn't earned back yet, shoulders squared, expression rehearsed. He looked around like he expected support to materialize out of habit. It didn't. I waited until everyone was seated before speaking. "This isn't about punishment," I said calmly. "It's about alignment." I slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents dated, signed, verified. Ownership changes, governance updates, authority lines clearly redrawn. Evan flipped through the pages, faster with each one. "You can't do this," he said quietly now. Not angry, not loud, just thin. "It's already done," I replied. Legal counsel confirmed it. Finance explained it. Operations acknowledged it. No one argued, because nothing there was emotional. It was factual. Evan looked around the room one last time, searching for an ally. Someone willing to say he still belonged. No one met his eyes. That was the moment he understood. Not that he'd lost money, but that he'd lost standing. And standing, once gone, doesn't return with apologies. It returns, if ever, through years of changed behavior. He left without another word. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds after the door closed. Then work resumed. Just like that. 6 months later, my life looked smaller from the outside. A modest apartment close to the office. Fewer meetings, fewer calls. No emergencies disguised as favors. But inside, everything felt lighter. The company was stronger than it had ever been. Not louder, not flashier, just steadier. Decisions were made faster. People spoke more honestly. No one waited for permission to care. Linda had been promoted. Rachel ran operations with quiet confidence. Marcus stopped double-checking his emails like someone might pull the ground out from under him. No one did. As for Evan, I heard fragments. A new city. A smaller job. Long explanations that no one asked for. We haven't spoken. Not because I slammed the door, but because reconciliation requires accountability, and he's still searching for someone else to blame. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it. If I miss my son, I tell them the truth. I miss the idea of who I thought he was. But I don't miss funding disrespect. I don't miss confusion disguised as love. I don't miss silence when it mattered most. Family isn't who shows up when things are easy. It's who stays when there's nothing to gain. I learned that lesson in an ICU room, listening to machines breathe for me. And it cost $4 million. Worth every cent.